We got a cute little chip. He came to help me start the video. You helping me start the video? Zoko baby. Shake. Shake. Oh, come on. You can shake. I know you shake. 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 Good boy. You good boy. You very good boy. Yes, you are. He's like, I am a good boy. Now let me out of the room. Okay, fine. I'll let you out of the room. Or maybe not. You want to stay in the room with Mommy while I record? Okay, you stay there. So, I'd had a slightly different intro planned for this video involving this thing. Which, I know this is not a real dinosaur with all the spikes and the frills and the horn and the head crest and everything, but it's the closest thing I have to, like, a T-Rex or an Allosaurus, given the subject of today's video. So, the other option was a Therizinosaurus toy that I have that I really like, because I love Therizinosaurus, but it didn't quite seem quite right, I guess. So you get the weird, deformed T-Rex thing. Sorry. So, today's video is the tie-in video for the Caribou in the New World. And today I am going to be talking about Red Flag Diaz Drake, or X Drake, or Diaz Drake, depending on which way you want to refer to him. All of them are technically correct. And so I'm going to be discussing him today, because I like him out of a lot of the Supernovas. I like him. He's like one of the few people in that cover page series that I would be okay with talking about. So we get that. And there's already going to be one of the other cover page series tie-in videos where I have to talk about a character that I dislike. So you'll have to wait and see who that is. So, Diaz Drake, or Red Flag Drake, is a captain in the Marine Secret Special Unit SWORD. He is also a rear admiral, or a former rear admiral. He had been undercover as the captain of the Drake Pirates in the one of the Supernovas, or one of the worst generations. And his bounty after the time skip is 222 million. Berry. So that's a pretty good berry. That's a pretty good bounty. Slight bit for his background that I'll go into a little bit more. His father, Diaz Barrels, is a Marine turned pirate and was the captain of the Barrels Pirates, who had the Opopnomi during Law and Doflamingo's flashback, where we have that revealed. Drake was there, and we'll go over that. He was on Minion Island or Swallow Island, whichever it was, when everything happened. And at the time, he was called Dory. It was like his nickname from his dad and the other crew. And the other thing that, of course, goes into his undercover time as a pirate is that he, of course, went undercover and became a spy within the Beast Pirates. Worked his way into Kaido's crew during the 2-year time skip, and eventually became one of the Tobiropo. One of the Flying Six, one of the highest ranked members, just under Kaido, King, Queen, and Jack. And there's all the Tobiropo. And eventually, during that time frame, he ends up, during the Battle of Onigashima, he ends up, of course, kind of revealing that he's undercover, gets found out, which we'll go over, and then he ends up helping the Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance that include Law and Luffy and their crews and the samurai and all of that stuff, and ends up helping them. He is currently 33 years old. And of course, his devil fruit is the Ryu no Mi model Allosaurus, or the Dragon Fruit model Allosaurus. Allosaurus, when Drake first showed up, first of all, I believe he is the first ancient zone shown in the manga or in the anime. And when he first shows up, since we're not quite sure what an ancient zone is at the time, when he first shows up, everybody kind of thinks maybe he's like a T-Rex, I think, for like the first chapter or so after he's been introduced in that regard. And then, of course, we find out, no, he's not a T-Rex. He's an Allosaurus. Which is fine. Would have been fine if he ended up if he was a T-Rex or an Allosaurus. I don't think either one would have made a huge difference. This, of course, allows him to turn either fully into an Allosaurus or into a human Allosaurus hybrid. He also falls under as a carnivorous zone because, of course, Allosaurs were carnivores, very similar to T-Rexes in that regard. And, of course, he is quite strong in this form, and he actually is, I believe, pre-time skip, is seen being able to... stronger than the steel body of the Pacifista. So he's able to like bite through the Pacifista. Pre-time skip. So that's pretty good. Of course, he's got Marine training under his belt. He's got like his like 4-headed axe that he uses, which is just kind of fun. Haven't really seen many of those. A little bit of trivia about Drake, just some bits that I thought were interesting. Drake's name is, of course, taken from the 16th century English adventurer and privateer Sir Francis Drake, who served under Queen Elizabeth I way back when. And if Drake were not a pirate, as in if he were in our world, he would be a zookeeper. Good for him. And Drake's hobbies are being a reptile maniac, so he really, really loves reptiles, which is fun because he turns into a dinosaur. Yes, I know dinosaurs are more closely related to birds than to reptiles, but you get the idea. And then, of course, studying astrophysics, which is fun because that's why I have my Starfleet shirt here. My Star Trek shirt, because I've already worn all of my dinosaur shirts, so I wanted to go with something a little less predictable for that. So he would study astrophysics, which is fun. Him and Neil deGrasse Tyson can go be friends. I think that would be fun. I actually genuinely think that Drake would be very happy to talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson about astrophysics, which would be just fun for, I think, him. So, into Drake's history. So, early on in his life, when he was born to Diaz Barrels, we don't know who his mom is, he aspired to be just like his father and become a Marine. And the little drawing that we have of Drake as a kid is him like wearing a little Marine outfit, and this would have been probably during the same time that his father was a Marine at the time. Unfortunately, at some point in time, before his teenage years, Barrels decided that, nah, I don't want to be a Marine anymore. I'm going to go be a pirate. And and we don't know exactly why this happens. We don't know if there's something that happens that like Barrels saw something that he wasn't supposed to, found out something that he wasn't supposed to. I mean, it doesn't really matter at the moment. Barrels is dead to the best of my knowledge. I'm pretty sure he is dead after the events that happened on Minion Island with the Don Quixote pirates and everything. But he possibly found out something or whatever, but somehow he ended up leaving the Marines and becoming a pirate, and then he started becoming very physically abusive to Drake. And Drake has a scar on his chin, and I think it's supposed to be implied that his father gave him that scar, the little X-shaped scar on his chin. I think that's implied his father gave that to him, but I'm not sure. So then when Drake is about actually, it was 13 years ago, so Drake was, almost 20 when this happens, because he's 33 now, so about, 13 years ago, he's about 20 when all of this happened. Drake was on Minion Island with the Barrels pirates, because he's still with his dad at that point in time, and they're trying to make a deal where they're trying to sell the Op fruit, for 5 billion berries, and of course, he's just referred to as Brat and everything else like this, by Barrels. And what ends up happening is, of course, first off, Rocinante attacks the base and causes some havoc there. Then we have the Don Quixote pirates show up, and they start attacking the base, and Dofi uses his bird cage on the island to essentially trap everybody there. Drake somehow manages to get out of that. I don't know how, maybe by some lucky chance he manages to get just past the bird cage before it's fully activated or something. I don't think we ever find out how, but he ends up getting picked up by the Marines. And because there's chatter on, because like we have Baby Five and Buffalo listening in on like the chatter from the Marines or eavesdropping on the Marines, they say that a young boy, because Drake was kind of malnourished at that time, so he looked younger than he actually was, a young boy was picked up by the Marines. And Dofi and the others take this as Law got picked up by the Marines. So they stop looking for Law, which works because then that allows Law the chance to escape after he's put in the chest and, has the silent bubble around him by Rocinante and everything. So, kind of helps that there. We have no idea okay. I might go over that later, we'll see, but we don't really know if Drake and Law know that there is this connection between the two of them. Probably not. They probably don't know about it, but so what then happens is, of course, Drake gets taken in by the Marines. He's found, and eventually he ends up, he trains in the Marines, and he eventually gets to the rank of a Rear Admiral, which is quite high. And he also ends up eventually getting his hands on the Allosaurus Devil Fruit. And he is, able to use that. I think he's the only Marine we know of that has an Ancient Zone, because most of the other ones are all on Kaido's crew, for obvious reasons, because beast pirates. But Drake then eventually ends up becoming part of the secret organization in the Marines called SWORD, and ends up becoming a captain there as well. Now, I don't know if that means he is the one fully in charge of SWORD. Probably not, but he's like higher ranked in the rankings of SWORD than like Kobe and Helmeppo and the rest of the crew that we see attacking Hachinosu and everything else like that. So, what ends up happening is about 4 years before the current storyline, when Drake is still a Marine, he accompanies Kizaru to Egghead when Vegapunk is working on starting to, build Egghead up. So when we get like Kuma and Bonnie's little flashback where we see Egghead, we see Drake there as one of the Marines helping with moving everything in. So that's nice there. And then at some point, Drake ends up being given this mission to go undercover as a pirate. Now, the way that they set this up for his cover story as a pirate is he defects from the Marines and he becomes called Red Flag Drake, meaning that he probably did something, or they made it look like he did something, staged an event or something like that made it look like he like murdered a subordinate or murdered a one of the higher ups or something like that. Or something along those lines, where he is now labeled as a red flag, as in like a traitor to the Marines and everything else like that. And he becomes a pirate and he forms the Drake Pirates. And his ship, the Liberal Hind, is actually a repainted Marine vessel, which is kind of fun. And we do see some other members of Drake's crew. We never get names on them, I don't believe. We just kind of see them. And there's always the question of like, are these Marines that were part of Drake's crew before he became a pirate and they just went with him out of loyalty, like he'd earned their loyalty and they went with him? Or these, Drake is framed as a traitor and becomes a pirate, and then he goes and he finds other people to form his crew and does that, or something, because we have not seen his crew. We see them pre-time skip, which I'll go over, but we haven't really seen them post-time skip. Like, we don't see them on Onigashima, we don't see them in Wano, and, so it's kind of this question of like, well, what happened to the rest of his crew? Where are they? Don't know. They could have just been like, oh, we're gonna be pirates, and they don't know that he's a Marine undercover, but I don't know. So eventually, he goes into this and he, starts to form his, career as a pirate, and eventually he gets high enough in the bounties with 222 million that he is a supernova by the time he reaches, the Sabaody Archipelago. Now, I'm just going to say this as a side note. We know what Luffy and his crew got up to for their adventures pre-time skip, all the way up to leading up to him being a supernova, him and Zoro being supernovas. Kid, of course, had the highest bounty out of all of them, and he had a much more violent career as a pirate. Hawkins kind of seemed to as well. Rouge maybe a bit, Not so much Bonnie. We know that her and her crew were just more out looking for Kuma, and that part of her bounty being so high is because they make it look like she's attacking children and old people, and when it's just her power activating on Marines. And then, it's also because she's Kuma's daughter, so they want to get a hold of her for that reason, to use her as leverage against Kuma. We don't really know what Drake does during this time frame. We know that he's off having his own adventures, ending up in the Grand Line, interacting with whatever islands he ends up landing on, any other pirate crews he fights, or any Marines that they come across. But I don't think Drake would necessarily just go and attack innocent people. I mean, he is a Marine at heart, and he's one of the good Marines at heart. So I don't think he would just go and attack innocent people, even if he is trying to build up this reputation. And it may have been they upped his bounty a bit to we're going to up his bounty just enough to get him up to being a supernova so people take notice of him, so maybe it'll help with his undercover mission. And again, we don't know how much of his undercover mission for Sword is aware of by, Sengoku as the fleet admiral at the time. How much that information is there, we don't know. It might be something that gets explained later, but for the time being, we don't know. Then we get to the Sabaody arc. And what ends up happening is, of course, after this voyage, he ends up, of course, at Sabaody in the Grand Line, and they're preparing to head into the New World. Now, there's several different things that happen during this time frame. First off, I believe the first time that we end up interacting with Drake here is, of course, Shaki's going through and naming all the other supernovas, and we see the supernovas kind of all interacting with each other, and Drake is interacting with Law. So we're kind of getting an interaction there. We also see that Drake works on stopping Arouge and Killer from fighting each other, because that's going to cause a scene. And, kind of just stops them and everything. It was just, hold off till we reach the New World. It's fine. We don't need to fight here. It's not going to help anybody if we fight here. So he stops that duel, that kind of little battle there. And then, of course, he kind of interacts with Law, which Randy Troy has the whole Law is in Sword theory, so maybe there is a connection there between Law and Drake, and they both know about each other being in Sword, and they're both pirates, and blah, 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 blah. I don't know. So, eventually, Drake is just kind of there on the island, and Drake is not involved in what happens at the Human Auction House. I'm pretty sure he approves of what, of Luffy punching out, excuse me. I'm pretty sure Drake approves of, Luffy punching out, Charlos and everything, but reasons. So, of course, he's on Sabaody when all of that happens, and of course, when, Kizaru eventually shows up, who he has worked with before and who he knows. There's also, Drake, of course, reads in the newspaper about what is going on with Ace, with Ace being captured and is set for execution. And Drake just thinks this is a bad idea because they're sentencing Ace to public execution at Marineford in however many days. And he's like, oh, that's not a good idea. That's definitely not a good idea. That's provoking war with Whitebeard and everything. That's provoking war with one of the Yonko. And all of that. So Drake does not think that that's a good idea. To be fair, he is correct. It was not a good idea for what they did. So we have that. And of course, Drake and his crew, he's undercover. He's like, okay, well, I gotta maintain my thing and we gotta get headed into the New World and everything else like that. He's there when Luffy attacks the World Noble. Well, he's not there, but he's on the island, and he kind of has to deal with some of the aftermath with, Kizaru showing up. He does kind of fight against Kizaru. Not too much, but they get, him and his men get headed off. And they actually are, so there's a few other things that happens. It's kind of Drake, Hawkins, and Arouge that kind of end up dealing with Kizaru at the same time, so they're kind of seeing what each other can do. This is where we see him bite through one of the pacifistas. He also ends up helping Arouge. And again, we don't know where Rouge's like moral compass lies, but he's like a monk, so maybe he's a little bit more on the good side of being a pirate as opposed to the more violent side of being a pirate, like Kid Lands. But again, not sure. He also has to deal with like Apu and all of that stuff because reasons. And of course, then, Kizaru goes off and deals with the Straw Hats during that time frame with, Kuma and all of that. And then we get to the Marineford arc, which during the Marineford arc, it's him and his crew are actually kind of sailing near Marineford where everything is happening as it's also being televised. So they're also like listening in on what's going on. And, because they have a Black Dead Ninmushi that Drake probably stole. Because it's for eavesdropping. So he's going through and like looking, listening through all of like kind of some of the stuff that's going on at Marineford. And he's like, that's not good. And it's definitely not good. But they get headed into the New World. So Drake heads into the New World. And essentially the first thing he does is he makes his way to this island that is like completely made of like metal. And he comes across this guy, Iron Boy Scotch, who is one of Kaido's subordinates, because Kaido rules this island. And Drake goes up to him and essentially is like, so if I fight you, is Kaido going to show up? And if I defeat you, is Kaido going to show up to like, whatever? And assumedly, Scotch is like, maybe? I don't know. It depends on how drunk he is today. And so Drake just fights Scotch, defeats him, and then assumedly Kaido shows up because during the time skip, Drake becomes a member of the Beast Pirates. He becomes one of the Tobiropo. He rises through the ranks. He proves himself to Kaido. Probably essentially what happens is like he attacks Scotch on this island. Kaido shows up because he heard that Scotch got attacked. Shows up. Who's the guy that beat up this iron cyborg thing that I have? And Drake's like, I did it. And he was like, okay. Why? He's like, turns into a dinosaur. I want to join your crew. You know what? You fit my theme. Sure, come on. You can come join my crew. We'll test you against some of the other ranks and see where you land. Is essentially what happened, assumedly, and he becomes a member, and he eventually makes his way up to Tobiropo as one of the Flying Six. We also know that at some point in time during this time frame, he attacks Amagasa Village, where, of course, Tama and, where Tama lives with, Tenguyama Hitetsu, where they live, and causes, bunch of damage there and everything else like that. I don't think Luffy ever... no, because they do say that it's Drake that attacked the village, but I don't know if Drake actually killed anybody when he attacked the village. I'm assuming... And we know that Drake eventually learns armament and observation haki because we see him use both of them later on. Whether that's something he learned as a Marine and we just didn't see him use pre-time skip, or it's something that he learned while with the Beast Pirates, which would make sense as well, and did that, but he attacks Amagasa Village at some point during the time skip, which we find out from Tama. And then we get into, post-time skip. And we have Caribou's Kihihi in the New World, which I've technically already talked about, but we'll just go over what happens here. Essentially what happened is, of course, Caribou is posing as Gabiru, and Drake shows up after Caribou defeats Scotch and destroys the factory and is, partying, revolution and all that stuff. Drake shows up, just bites Caribou, and takes Caribou out very quickly, and just kind of drags Caribou off. Caribou does, he gets between, Drake and the grandma, and it's just like, hey, no, take me. So, he gets a point for that, but he's still horrible. And they end up, of course, Drake drags Caribou off, drags him back to Wano, throws him in Udon prison, and of course that's where, Caribou meets up with Luffy later on. Again, we don't see that much of Drake during, before we get back to Wano, but we do know that at some point in time after Dofi's defeat, we know that Drake is reading about that in the paper with Luffy and Law's victory and everything, and he does acknowledge that Doflamingo killed his father, but he doesn't hold a grudge against Doflamingo because at that point in time, again, we don't know exactly what happened with Barrels. We don't know if it was, he saw something and it kind of made him go mad, and maybe that's why he became a pirate, or if it was just greed or whatever. But, Drake didn't hold a grudge against Dofi, so I'm like, okay. Pretty sure if someone killed my dad, I'd be like, okay, I kind of want revenge, but I want you to rot in jail for the rest of your life. Type of thing. I don't know. At that point in time, Drake had been abused by his dad for quite a while, so again, situations. Then we get into Wano, where we have a bunch of stuff that Drake is involved in. So, as I said, Drake has kind of just been living in Wano for the past 2 years, has worked his way up through the Beast Pirates, is a member of the Toby Roppo, has had to deal with all of them for a while. And what you looking for, boo? He's like, I'm going to go over here and maybe look out the window. You gonna look out the window? You gonna be a cute boo? Puppy. I have an Iron Man cup today. I do. You're a good baby. Boop. He's just like, what are you doing? So Drake of course is living in Wano, all of that part is a member of the Toby Roppo, all that stuff. And the first time that we see him in Wano is Drake and Page One are sent to punish the soba shop owner, Sanji, for beating up beating up some of the other Yakuza men. Denjiro's men is Kiyoshiro. So Drake and Page One are sent to deal with that. And they're accompanied by Hawkins, so they're like kind of dealing with some of that. It doesn't really result in anything there, because Sanji's not around at that point in time. And then we get to the next day where Hawkins and Drake are leading a raid on one of the bathhouse because, people from the Kurozumi family, that are supporters of the Kurozumi family have like the crescent moon symbol on their ankles. So they're going to a bathhouse to see who has crescent moon symbols on their ankles and all of that stuff. And we get a little bit of just Drake being kind of funny, which is, cute. Drake doesn't really want to go in the bathhouse because Drake gets a little embarrassed with all of like the fact that there's like, naked people, naked women specifically, in there bathing. And Drake really doesn't want to go in there. Are you okay? You look a little upset in the background there, boo. He's like, I got sun. I'm fine, Mommy. Okay. And so Drake doesn't really want to go in the bathhouse, which is just kind of funny. But eventually, because of all the commotion that happens in the bathhouse, with Hawkins trying to, like, get Nami and everything, Drake does end up running into the bathhouse right when, like, Nami's towel falls off. So he's just like, oh, God. And he, like, hides and falls on the ground because he's like, oh, God, no. Because I think that's partially him, like, being a gentleman, but also just him being kind of like, oh, God, naked woman, which is just funny. So we get that. At the same time, Sanji, of course, has the nosebleed moment with, like, the raid suit kind of malfunctioning. So Drake is having a day because Drake and Hawkins are kind of both having a day. They raid this bathhouse. This woman's towel falls. She's gorgeous, of course, because Nami. And then Drake is like, oh, God, no. And, like, falls on the ground, is hiding. And Hawkins kind of reprimands him, which is funny. And then Stealth Black of the Germa Double Six just shows up in the bathhouse with a nosebleed. Just, like, pops out of nowhere type of thing. And Drake and Hawkins, of course, recognize him because they're both from the North Blue, so they know who the Germa are, and they know about, of course, the comic. They grew up reading the comic. So both of them are kind of having this fanboy experience. Law kind of ends up having this fanboy experience at one point as well. Because, of course, he grew up, he knows who the Germa Double Six are, of course. For the same reason, because they're all from the North Blue. And he's like, oh my god, it's Stealth Black. And like him and Sanji end up fighting a little bit. As like, Hawkins is trying to get a hold of, trying to figure out what's going on. So they kind of fight. And then, Sanji is able to knock them out enough, or at least cause enough of a distraction that he's able to go and grab Nami, Robin, and Shinobu, and they're all able to escape. Then we get to a little bit later when we have the when they're going to have the execution of Yasuie, where he's imprisoned. Drake and Hawkins are both there, standing guard at Red Setsu prison. So they're there. And they're there when, everything is happening, when, he's giving his speech and everything else like that, and there's, everything happening with the commotion from Komurasaki's funeral and everything, with, Orochi showing up and trying to kill Toko, and, all this other stuff. And, again, I'm going to put this in a little bit of regards from, Drake's point of view. So, Drake is having to be undercover for the past 2 years. He's probably had to do some stuff that he's not proud of. He probably would have supported the revolution that was going on the Metal Island against Kaido with Caribou and that revolution there. He probably would have actually supported that, but he has to maintain his undercover thing. He probably didn't want to attack on Magasa Village, and maybe when he was attacking, he was trying to do his best to not actually kill anybody, kill any of the villagers. Just, make it look like he caused a lot of problems and then scared them off type of thing. And here, Yasuie is, he doesn't really know the full context of who Yasuie is, probably because he probably doesn't know as much about the Wano history and everything else like that, but maybe he learned some of it, but he doesn't really know who Yasuie is. And what he's seeing is this old man who appears to be down on his luck, homeless type of a thing, the way that he is, the way that a lot of Wano is, where they're just poor. And, he's seeing all this, and then he sees him be executed, and then he sees this little girl run out of the crowd and run up and is screaming for her dad, and, begging him to get up and all of this stuff. And Drake probably would just far rather go over and pick up the little girl and give her a hug, is probably what Drake would much rather do with his, because he's a good Marine, and he's a good guy, and he would probably much rather just go and, help this little girl, give her a hug, find her someplace safe, and then, respectfully bury her father, type of a thing. So, we kind of have that. Is probably what Drake would like to do, but we really don't have Drake's inner thoughts here. But, essentially what ends up happening is when they see the execution, Toko runs over, and then, of course, Zoro and Sanji show up, and they protect Toko, and then Drake transforms into his Allosaurus form, and he and Sanji end up fighting. He's kind of Sanji's little opponent for that, while Zoro ends up dealing with Kyoshiro. Is kind of what happens there. Sanji, of course, gets Toko out of there, and then he and Drake are, kind of fighting for a bit. And then, of course, eventually, Sanji is able to evade. And then, of course, we have it that later on, Hawkins had managed to capture Law because, he took Beppo, Sachi, and Penguin hostage and, used them, for his, his straw doll technique that he does, his little voodoo dolls. And, of course, Law stayed to, let his men be set free. And then, of course, what ends up happening is Drake ends up helping Law escape. He, releases Law enough so Law is able to then, incapacitate Hawkins enough that he's able to escape. And, so we get some of that. Don't remember if Hawkins ever does find out that Drake did that or whatever. Probably figures it out. I mean, Hawkins is not dumb. Hawkins isn't dumb. And then we get Drake then eventually goes and he finds his way to one of the abandoned residents on the outskirts of Ebisu. And he makes a Dendenmushi call, and he is talking to Kobe, who is currently on... This is, of course, Kobe is currently on his way to Amazon Lily, because, of course, he's there to try to capture Boa Hancock. Yeah, good luck with that, Kobe. Well, he doesn't succeed, now does he? He gets captured by Blackbeard. But he's on his way there, and, of course, we're having this moment where, Drake is informing Kobe of what's going on. He's like, Kaido and Big Mom are forming an alliance, and then CP0 are here, and all this other stuff. And we know at some point in time, Drake has made some trip back to like one of the Marine headquarters and has interacted with Kobe. And Kobe is, has like told Drake about the fact that like, oh yeah, you can trust Luffy. Luffy's really a good guy. And like probably told Drake a little bit about some of the stuff that, Kobe has seen Luffy do and everything, and, told him that. And that does come into play in a bit. But he's also telling, like, the Straw Hats are here, and Wano, and then Big Mom's here, and her and Kaido are forming an alliance, so there's a bunch of that stuff going on. He's passing on that information. Then we get to the Fire Festival, everything that happens on Onigashima. At the Fire Festival, Drake and the rest of the Tobiropo, where we get to be introduced to the rest of them. We kind of all see them sitting together in, like, a waiting room or in a meeting room area. And, like, they all kind of get, like, the cool little introductions, and then they all just start squabbling with each other, which is just kind of funny. Kaido has them all summoned and everything, and they all go into, like, Kaido's room. They're like, Kaido's like, I have a mission for all of you. Go and find Yamato. Go and find my son. I don't know where he is, but go and find him. And whoever brings him back can challenge one of the All-Stars to try to take their position or whatever as a reward if you succeed. So, Drake isn't really all that. I mean, like, I guess Drake would, like, be like, oh, if I find Yamato and bring him in, I can try to challenge. I think the best one Drake would have the best chance of beating would be Jack, just because he's Jack. But Drake doesn't really end up getting involved in that part. What does happen is Drake and Hawkins are like talking, and Hawkins, of course, has this moment where he's like, reading through the cards and checking everything. And, he's like, oh, there's like this whatever percentage chance of this person surviving tonight. And Drake's like, okay. And then we have Who's Who shows up, and Who's Who is talking to Drake, and it's like, hey, how about you and I work together? We join forces and we go and kill Queen. Drake kind of takes him up on that offer. They go, they find Queen, and it ends up being an ambush, and it's actually Who's Who told Queen that they think that Drake is a traitor, and it is, this is like where that little thing is all revealed. Assumedly, it's like maybe Hawkins figured it out and then told the others, or told Queen, or, Who's Who or whatever, and then they set up this plan to ambush Drake. But they ambush him and they accuse him of treachery and betraying them and everything else like that. And this is all happening at the same time that like a bunch of the stuff is happening out on the live stage. This is after Kaido and the Scabbards are up on the roof fighting, I believe. I think. And because like Luffy and the others are out causing havoc on the floor at this point in time. And there's like this huge explosion that happens, and Drake uses that as a moment to flee. So he's running and trying to get out of there. And he essentially jumps from one of the balcony windows, and he attacks one of the numbers at the same time that Luffy attacks the other number that's next to it. And nice scene. Couldn't find a good picture of it, but it's a nice scene. And they attack the numbers at the same time. And, in the middle of all this, Drake is like requesting Luffy's assistance, his aid to join their alliance. Can I join your alliance and be on your side? Because like I am like this lone wolf here, this lone dinosaur here. Well, you're not, because there's several other dinosaurs, and you're actually running from a dinosaur, with Queen being a Brachiosaur, but I get the idea. He's like, I am a lone combatant, kind of, please let me join your forces. And Zoro, Frankie, and Jinbei are all very, 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 very much do not trust Drake. Given the fact that it's like, he's a member of Kaido's crew. Now he's betraying them and he's trying to help us and blah, 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 blah. So, again, I get it. And what ends up happening is, Zoro and Drake kind of clash. And then, of course, we have Queen shows up and he's using his plague bullets for the Isoni virus, and that's starting to affect everybody. And, Drake is very alarmed by this because of the way this stuff spreads. And as a member, it was like, Drake has probably tried to use his position as a member of the Tobiropo to try to learn as much as he can about each of the different other members of the Tobiropo and of the headliners and of a bunch of, as many of the other members of Kaido's crew as possible. So that way, later on, if, when he's, if he has to, give them any other information to the Marines or whatever, or use this to his own advantage, he's able to do that. He's a spy, and Drake has always struck me as a rather intelligent individual. And, in regards to that stuff. So we kind of have that for what's going on. And Drake ends up, he's like, oh no, that's not good. And the virus is just spreading and affecting both sides. And, Queen tosses Apu the antidote and, of course, challenges, Apu to, take the cure from him, take the cure from Apu and everything. So everybody's chasing after Apu, including Drake and Zoro, and they're attacking, it's like, okay, we're going to put aside our little argument for right now, and we're going to go chase after that prick. And they chase after Apu. They end up, not defeating him, but not, getting him knocked out enough that they're able to get the antidote from him and give the antidote to Chopper, so Chopper can study the antidote in the vial and use that to help make his Chopper phage. Make this, big antidote that he's able to use for everything. And then Drake just kind of spends this next bit of time acting as one of the other protectors of Chopper while he is, he tells Zoro to head up to the roof so that Zoro can head up there to go deal with Kaido, help fight Kaido. And then Drake stays down there and he remains as one of the guards with to protect Chopper, as well as Robin and Brook are there. And of course, Hirogoro and some of the other members of the Yakuza are there as well. And Drake and Hirogoro, of course, fight against Apu and other members of the Beast Pirates as they keep them away from Chopper while he's working. Unfortunately, we end up having to deal with the Oniwabanshu and the Mimawari Gumi and everything during this whole time frame. And of course, Hirogoro is being affected by the Isoni virus at the same time, and Drake is very impressed by Hirogoro's strength and everything else like that as he's defeating a bunch of the members, as he watches Hirogoro defeat a bunch of members of the Omiwari Gumi and the Oniwabanshu and the Mimawari Gumi. I don't know what word I just made up in Japanese, so I apologize. So we have them. So he's very impressed by this. And then, of course, we have it that, Chopper shows up and he's able to release the Chopper phage and cure all of the infected people and everything, infected by the Oni virus. And then we have the great scene where Chopper goes into Monster Point and then punches Queen. He was like, I am not a Tanuki. And Drake is like, ugh, sorry for calling you a Tanuki. He's like, we get the great scene of Drake's one of the ones that was like, sorry I called you a Tanuki type of thing. So we have that. Then we kind of lose track of Drake because we're focusing in on other things for a little while. Eventually we find Drake again and he's down in the cave chamber with Apu and 3 of the numbers. And Apu is proposing this alliance to Drake, so that way they can, finish off this victory and blah, 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 blah. And Drake does not trust Apu, which is a smart idea. And they end up kind of, battling a little bit. And during the skirmish at one point in time, Yamato bursts in. Drake is, of course, unaware that Yamato is helping the Straw Hats. And Yamato doesn't know that Drake is no longer a member of the Tobiropo, so they kind of end up fighting a little bit. And then, different things happen there, and then we have everything happen where Drake and Apu have to deal with the CP0 agents. So they kind of stuff happens. People are running around, and they just end up in different areas. And of course, they end up, they have to run away from the Consenbo, and then everything is on fire, and they end up eventually finding their way to where Guernica and Maha are chasing after Robin and Brooke. Now, Apu gets photographs here of Guernica, the other agents, being on Wano, which is weird, and of course that reveals that Drake is a traitor to them, and that he's an undercover Marine, so blah 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 blah. So technically Drake and CP0 should technically be on the same side, but Sword and probably not. So Drake and Apu kind of have to team up a little bit to try to deal with, some of them. Have to try to deal with them. They're bickering, and then they're like, okay, fine, and we'll try to fight the government agents. Several things end up happening here. They're again getting run around. Of course, Izo shows up, and Izo manages to defeat Maha. Izo and Maha defeat each other, unfortunately. And Drake then overhears Guernica, or Drake gets knocked out at one point in time, or he gets knocked down by Guernica with the finger pistol and everything else like that. And Drake ends up overhearing Guernica being given orders to go and kill Luffy. And Drake does not like this. He okay, well that's not happening on my watch if I can help it. And Drake, stands back up, and he's in his hybrid form, and he stands back up and he stabs Guernica in order to try to stop him. And, he's like, I'm not going to let that happen. So he stabs Guernica. And from behind, unfortunately, the agent is durable enough that he then ends up stabbing Drake in the neck with Shigon, and Drake goes down. And of course, he heads off to go and, Guernica heads off to go and, interfere with the battle between Luffy and Kaido, which of course leads to Gear Fist. So technically it was helpful. But reasons. And then we finally get the aftermath of Onigashima. Drake's kind of been knocked out during the rest of this whole time frame with everything. And Momonosuke manages to land Onigashima, and Jinbei and Raizo are able to put out the fire and everything else like that. Pretty boo. And little baby, I love you so. You can't really see him. His face is kind of sunned out, but he's there. He's cute. And what ends up happening is, Drake is kind of just laying there on the ground. He's kind of recovered a little bit. He didn't die of blood loss or anything. He's laying there, and he's just kind of okay. And Hawkins ends up making his way over with one less arm, and makes his way over. And he's like, so, you are a Marine. And Drake kind of just refuses to answer. And they're kind of having this conversation a little bit. And Drake asks him, well, who was the person who was supposed, who had that, such a high chance of death. And Drake, Hawkins kind of just leans back against the wall and falls to the ground, because he's missing one of his arms, because of his fight with Killer. And he's like, yeah, no, that was me. I had the really high likelihood of dying tonight. And then he just dies, just collapses onto the floor and presumably dies. Hasn't been 100% confirmed, but presumably dies. Then we get into this last little bit for the last bits that we saw of Drake. So, eventually, after the raid on Onigashima, Drake kind of loses a little bit of contact with Sword for a little bit, but eventually he is able to find his way off of Wano, and is able to be picked up by submarines or other members of Sword or whatever. And he is at the Marine GS General Hospital, which is also where Kobe and members of Sword, who were part of the raid on Hachinosu, trying to save Kobe, and, Garp ended up getting captured instead, but, they saved Kobe and a bunch of others. And that's where they are all recovering. So Drake, and then of course, Drake is there as well. He's recovering in a different room. And, Kujaku is, he's like, yeah, he's fine, but he kind of wants space for right now. Because, Drake took a lot of damage during the battle on Onigashima as well. No argument there. And even with him being a, ancient zone, making him a bit more durable, or a lot more durable, he's still having quite a bit of a recovery time. Because, by this point in time, this is several weeks at the most. Or at the least after what happens on Wano, and Luffy and Zoro and all the other Straw Hats are all recovered from their stuff, and they're dealing, they're on Egghead right now because we have Vegapunk's broadcast going in the background, and Drake is of course listening in on the broadcast, and Drake has met Vegapunk before, so it's kind of this interesting thing where it's just like, okay, well, he's met Vegapunk before, but what's going on? He's like. He's met Vegapunk. That doesn't mean that he was super involved with getting to know Vegapunk, but he's met Vegapunk, I'm sure. Really helped move Vegapunk to Egghead Island. And it's just kind of this very interesting thing where it's just like, okay, well, we don't know what Drake's going to do next. Whatever it ends up doing is probably going to be something involving Sword, because that's, of course, the part of the organization of the Marines that he is a part of. But we don't know what that's going to be. Or at the very least, as of the moment of recording of this, we don't know what that's going to be. We don't know if that's going to be Drake is going to be, Drake and Kobe and the others are going to try to do something, or, Kobe is very motivated to try to stop Luffy from becoming king of the pirates now and getting the One Piece and all of that. So the, Sword might coalesce behind Kobe type of a thing, and we'll see what happens there. But I don't know. Drake will probably show back up again. I like Drake. He's not my favorite out of the Supernovas. That's Bonnie and then Law. And then I really like Beiji. Beiji is a fun member of them, and I was going to talk about Beiji a little bit when I get to his cover page series. But so there's a lot of that. So don't know what Drake's going to do next, but I like him. He's fun. He's a little more of an interesting member. He's a little more interesting than Hawkins or Apu, and we don't know enough about Arouge to make an opinion about Arouge yet. So that's what I have here. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.